Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to talk about Flat Earth again, and we're going to talk about it from a more existential perspective and approach, and try to dive into why folks are either against it or for it, but really with a 90% emphasis on those that are for it, and try to parse what we think might be our future if we could somehow prove it. I made an episode back in Season 1 called The Alien Promise, which I'm fairly proud of. And it really talks about why folks want to believe in aliens. And it's usually something along the lines that we'll have help. That aliens will participate. They'll cure cancer. They'll give us free gasoline. They'll take us to other planets. There'll be no more taxes, no more bills. It'll be a bit like Star Trek, right? Well, the idea that we're under a firmament dome inside of a flat Earth, floating in some, theories vary quite a bit, but let's just say one theory says we have water above us. Some people think we're a floating, snow globe in space. And some folks are willing to go way more existential than that and believe that there's sort of an interdimensional gate that represents the firmament dome. There's a lot of folks that believe it's a psyop. But then again, if you really look at the evidence, it's very flimsy that it is a psyop. It's just a well-written letter that's passed around. That was a cognitive infiltration letter that went around the web. I mean, shit, I could have written that. I got those skills. I can get fictional like that and write something convincing. There's been a lot of drama around the whole movement that's absolutely unnecessary and benefits no one. People have had their lives, disturbed by these online bickering matches with other flat earth groups, weird live events where people are doing the weirdest unrelated things to flat earth. And it kind of drives home the fact that we have weirdos that believe in anything. And then that stigmatizes you to continue your research because you're like, oh my God, we have people that are drinking their own urine and people that are tattooing every Illuminati symbol on their body and trying to convince people that they're for a good movement. And you look at it and you're like, I wouldn't invite you to my fucking house, let alone listen to any goddamn thing you have to say. Your judgment is obviously routinely poor. The internet's forever, folks. The internet is forever. And just because your next employer hasn't caught you lamenting about drinking your own urine, and, currently the world is run by the scumbag, so having your body tattooed with a bunch of Illuminati symbols won't cause you employment problems. Well, I guess you're hoping that we don't wake up, and that at no point does your employer find an old video of you going through a very awkward phase. But what's interesting is I've got friends who are fairly defensive about Flat Earth, which I actually like. I like the fact that they have found something that, for everything that they've studied, it makes sense to them and they defend it. It means it's important to them. It means that somehow that there's a benefit for them. But what are the benefits? Is there something called the Flat Earth Promise? Now, obviously, Flat Earth goes into a bunch of different directions, but let's parse this for 1 second. If we are in some sort of simulator, wearing virtual reality HMD headsets, right? Then what we see as conscious beings is really relative to each one of us. Even if we find ourselves inside the big MMO, computer, central computer, the people that are always sick all the time, that always have to have your attention, they just live in Munchausen syndrome. Well, that's what they want in their life, so that's what they get. They corrupt their genes, they corrupt their immune system through literally epigenetics and worrying about everything, and oh God, I can't get any attention, so I'm going to get sick again, and that kind of shit, right? Then there's some of us that look up every day, no matter what. We get up, we do law of attraction, we create our own universe, and we always go towards the positive, and we usually always end up on our feet. The phone always rings when it needs to ring, the doorbell rings when it needs to ring, and we go on with our lives, right? The reason why I mention that is that if we're all in a mass hysteria about the world being round, then perhaps the overall shape of our universe tends to lend itself to a heliocentric model. Now again, for me, with flat Earth, as long as the Peterson projection or Peter projection map is accurate, flat Earth can do something to that map that is pretty undeniable, which is to shrink all the oceans and wrap it into a nice little soccer ball. So for me, that's pretty round. But we're not going to pay attention to that. We're going to go straight into the flat Earth thing. But now if we have an infectious conscious virus into our sort of creationism reality here, let's just say, then the consensus on where we are on the planet is no longer a consensus. And if we are truly creating reality as we exist on this planet, to have a growing group of folks believe it's flat, it might be really fascinating that it could turn flat because we create the universe. You know, there's all these stories that man used to live 900 to 1,000 years back in the past, and there's all kinds of wild theories about how the atmosphere was different, that there was even a layer of water over the world and that it broke and fell down and created the oceans. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But with the water up there, we didn't age very much. You know, the caps on our chromosomes stayed intact, whatever causes aging, right? But imagine the whole thing is nothing more than a giant epigenetic algorithm that creates reality. That as we envision things to be a certain way, the world simply through consensus, through overall hive mind power, makes it that way. And so all of us believing there's a firmament dome could almost nonsensically create the firmament dome out of thin air. Or any reality that we want, right? But what is the overall benefit of it being flat? What is it? I think it's just like Alien Promise from episode 1. It is that we will have help. That we are very close to our creators, whomever they might be, whether they be aliens or God himself, we're closer. Now, it doesn't seem to mow my lawn wherever we are. It doesn't seem to save, Tom Petty from dying. So the world that we're in is pretty darn circumstantial. I mean, it just happens. One sequence to the other. If there's a level of intervention in the world by our Creator, it is so subtle and so beautiful and so integrated into reality that it just is. It's not a phone call. I was going to do a little digression here because it occurred to me the other day when I saw Blade Runner 2049. You know, the film is all replicants, right? And these replicants believe that they exist because they have memory tracks put in them. So that when they wake up on the creation table, they automatically have memories. And this has been used several times. Philip K. Dick started it way back in the 50s, and it's just been picked up ever since. Sing the Body Electric was the episode in Twilight Zone that actually I stated wrong. It's not written by Philip K. Dick, but is one of the first times they took that theory and put it in there. But anyway, the idea is this. Each one of us merely needs to be a stationary kind of door jamb of existence. And the data set, which could be nothing more than sheet music going through a player piano, goes through our door jamb. And at that moment that it intersects our door jamb, which is our physical being, we get the current experience of what we are right now. Isn't that wild? So this relative illusion that we exist, this I think therefore I am Descartes theory, is or can be, I should say, several forms of existence, several forms of reality, that could create the exact illusion that is this illusion. And the reason why I go on that little existential diversion is because I want you guys to remember that it might not be flat and it might not be round. It just is this global hive mind perception of what reality is. And what if we were spirits that were floating around inside some container and we simply think it through? And we kind of just start having little tiny ebbs and flows of theory. Somebody has an epiphany way down the way, and that epiphany comes across like a tsunami, like a wave. And we all start having that same realization. And we know it's all fake. We know it's all abstract, but we go along with it because we're bored to death, because we live forever. And eventually we create stars and we create planets. And someone says, oh my gosh, what if we could actually touch down on a planet? Oh, okay. Well, the first idea of a planet is a disk. Because they're thinking in the second, dimension, X and Y, a Cartesian coordinate system, and someone fantasizes about the third dimension and starts giving it some dimensionality, and so we go from flat Earth to a heliocentric ball. But it was flat, and now it's round, because our perception of reality is constantly evolving, and we create the universe. We create the whole thing. The thing is, I think the flat Earth movement has utterly stalled. All the videos online are repeat regurgitations of the previous theories. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing that it's stalling, but I'm just saying it's sort of a natural pattern when you've kind of thought up everything that could possibly be thought up. And again, somebody buy a gyroscope, put it in a box, spin it in your lap, on a plane, fly from New York to Mexico City, and things should be going sideways in your lap by the time you arrive. Just do that little experiment and you will prove once and for all what shape this world is. Just have the balls to report it if it contradicts what you believed when you started the journey, which is probably flat. But wouldn't it be awesome to be close to God? I think about it all the time. I think about being close to God all the time and breaking some of these ridiculous, according to me, rules that we can't converse with our Creator like it used to be supposedly in biblical times, right? Which is such a crock in biblical times. I shouldn't even say that. Arbitrary moments when white men wanted to be really close to God. But this notion that, there's a point where I believe you believe in God, and there's probably nothing that's going to shake that belief between now and the day you die. And if there's one being in existence that knows if that's true or false, it's God. So let's say he can't come down here and prove himself to us because it would take away faith and perhaps choice, even if you sat down and said, God, what's a sin? Which things are sins and which things aren't? Well, at that point, your only choice in life is to choose between things that aren't sins. And that sounds like an ideal situation, right? But I think we learn a lot of dimensionality of the universe by doing things that are morally opposing sometimes, and I'm not talking about killing someone, I'm just talking about little things. But what if God said there is no sin? Go for it. You live forever. Then the world turns into a crazy house. So it just seems like there are things that are there for reasons, right? And we don't want to lose sort of the fabric that's there. But the big question is, if I can have a conversation with a human being on this planet of all walks of nature, young, old, smart, dumb, whatever, and I can have a good time doing it and no one gets offended or whatever, then why can't we have some form of God down here to talk to us on our level? Just seems like it'd be possible without totally screwing the pooch. And it would bring a little bit of heaven to earth, wouldn't it? Just to know that God is unequivocally real, to hear his voice, his tone, his approach to things. Is he hell and damnation? Is he fire and brimstone? Is he an immature child that constantly gets angry? Or is he the most beautiful, all-knowing, omnipresent, I'd give him that role too. And then maybe it would make us relax a little bit, you know. I definitely know some crazies in Topeka who could pull a cork out of their ass. That's Topeka, Kansas, for those of you who don't know. So some of the things about Flat Earth that are very interesting are the idea that there's a ceiling. Have you ever had comfort walking into a nice restaurant? In California here we have restaurants called Houston's. They're also called R&D Cafe, R&D Kitchen. But they have really low ceilings, and they're beautifully lit. It's always like some cozy kind of dark light. And you go in there and you feel good. You just feel cozy. It's kind of like a nice little shelter that you're going to eat at, and it's nice food and good people and great drinks. So the idea that even though the firmament dome would be up there quite a ways, it's a hell of a lot closer than infinity as we perceive space. And so even though God isn't right here in our backyard talking to us, we can imagine whatever you want to imagine that dome wall to be. Is it a hard shell that, you know, melts in your mouth, not in your hands? Does it have water flowing up there? Someone, you know, I think literally abuses the theory of as it is above, so too it is below. I mean, we have Earth down here too, you know. It's not all ocean. There's no reason why up there should be down here, right? But, you know, this way, straight up, is where we can't access that very easily, right? We don't all have little SpaceX agencies, and we certainly don't have anti-gravity machines that we have access to that could gently take us up to the Truman Show bubble wall, and we could go knock, knock, knock. Now, I think we're probably very convinced that there is an up. I've been in many planes in my lifetime and jets, right? So whatever it is, it's up there, and it's also cold as hell up there. So just like so many of the beautiful videos that talk about the design of Earth being one to keep us here. You got your ice barrier on the outside edge of the disk. You have no atmosphere and super, 0 Kelvin upper atmosphere, and you've got lava down below, so we are trapped here. And the oceans themselves are made of salt water, and as you get closer to the edge where you might escape, it just becomes miserable to get out of it. That was the first thing that I thought was very interesting, and they overlaid it with the experiment of the little mouse inside the fish tank. About every, I don't know, I think they said 30 days, but I'm sure it's a lot sooner than that. But at least within 30 days, a mouse will go all the way around the edge of the aquarium trying to find an exit, and then he sort of chills in the middle. He's like, all right, this is where I am. But if you make a container big enough that you don't perceive there to be an edge, you don't search. I think it would be fascinating as almost an Orson Welles, War of the Worlds, to somehow broadcast on every mass media chain. I mean, they're fake anyway, might as well go for it. This information that we are in a firmament dome and that there is a barrier at the ice, you go in 350 miles or whatever it is off the coast of Antarctica, the circular barrier. Tell the whole world that we're in this gigantic disk, and just see what people do. There would be an utter exodus to the wall, and people would be trying to find it, and people would be trying to go through it, and they couldn't live one more day of their life normal until they were totally and utterly informed about what is on the other side of that wall. Because we're humans, right? We love mystery. But that's not going to happen, is it? One of the most interesting things I've done with some friends of mine that are still flat earth enthusiasts is, one, I ask them every day I see them, and I say, look, what's new? What's new in your movement? Because for a year and a half there, it got militant if you want to disagree. And of course, I went down the rabbit hole with them. But today it's, the answer always comes back, well, nothing. It's the same old stuff. And so it's kind of petered out. But now, at the same time, there's dozens and dozens of videos every day on the subject matter. And there's silly ones that, compare it to things that have nothing to do with it, which is really funny. For me, the biggest allure of Flat Earth for both myself when I was in it and for the folks that I know that are still in it is being close to our creator or creators, whatever that might be. Because every time I ask my friends, what's the benefit? Let's say you're right. What's the benefit? It kind of spirals out of any cognitive conversation, right? The anti-theory about it being globe, or from some of the more religious Christian-based folks, which again is one of the smallest religions on this planet, is that the globalists of the world, the money changers, they have created this whole story about it being spherical 500 plus years ago, which is really just a flash in the pans for humanity, right? And that they're trying to, again, separate us from God. To not only separate us, but to say that God doesn't exist because look at how the universe is just an it. When at no point does science ever, ever, ever really address the existential properties of being alive that would indicate there is a creator and that things have been created intelligently, given that, again, we don't have any living being on this planet that isn't beautiful. We don't have shoeboxes that talk, and we don't have blobs that ooze around the world and procreate. We've got works of art in every single category of life, right? And part of me can get behind that theory that there could be a world organization that would want that eventuality, because once you remove God, the only thing you have left is a human Mother Goose. And they are the ones that want to control everything. They want to be worshipped as gods. Remember the handful of pharaohs that wanted to be worshipped as gods. Every world leader, every region of the world that has had world leaders go through their geographical location has always had one nutcase that wanted to be worshipped as a god. Look at North Korea. The Ung family. The Kim family, excuse me. They have their people worshiping them like gods. Whether or not they actually buy that bullshit or not is to be determined. But when they had American doctors fly over and perform cataract surgery on old people, they put blindfolds on them, surgery bandages on their eyes to keep them good after the surgery. But when they pulled them off, they had to be staring at a picture of Kim Jong-il before he died, and then recite this phrase that it was their leader that cured their eyesight, not an American doctor that went over and cut out some foggy gel out of their eyeballs, right? So the Flat Earth people that say that the globalists want you to worship them instead of God, they've got a leg to stand on. And regardless of what shape it is, that's a true story. That's a true fact about the way things are orchestrated here on planet Earth. And how sad is that, right? Just to spin off a little bit on this, I said this a few episodes back, but I want to put it right here, which is the Old Testament used to have eye for an eye punishment. And I think that kept the world pretty damn in check, right? You get caught doing shit, it depends on what you're doing, but you get the same treatment back to yourself. Someone takes out your eye, you take out their eye. And you don't even have to be the one that does it after. That's law. Other people can do it on your behalf. You're up healing in some hospital trying to figure out how to look out of one eyeball, and they're just got this guy out in the woods plucking his eye out because he did it to you. So the whole world worked together in this eye for an eye thing. But what happened with the New Testament that was written by the Flavius family? This invention of this, again, old story of the prodigal son. They said, turn the other cheek. And then they used, nearly 1,000 years of inquisitions to pound it into your brain to turn the other cheek. And all it meant was turn the cheek to your controller, which allowed them to further control you and punish you and do horrible things to you because you're taught by God to turn the other cheek. Well, God is this wrathful child that the second you fuck with him, he destroys the whole world with floods. Makes you kill your relatives, right? So on one level, this episode could be called, Meeting God. And what that would entail. How many people are total flat earthers that are just as imperfect as everyone else, but in their overgrown Christian minds and they're with absolute sin in their brain defined, could pass the test of getting through those pearly gates with St. Pete looking down their gullet and saying, sorry, kid. You know how you told everyone on earth that they had to be perfect, otherwise they were going to hell? Well, newsflash, professor. You're not perfect, and therefore we're going to hold you to the standards by which you held others to. Return. Return, and do it right this time. Don't get all convinced you're right about everything. Don't damn your fellow human beings so much. Learn that intent is sin, not just some mistaken action by another human being. Now, if someone said to you, let's say that there was the announcement that they said, look, we're on a flat disk. That really up until the point the Wright brothers created the plane, our ability to easily explore such a claim was hindered quite a bit. Because at the same time the airplane was invented, we started to really master ships, outside of just some of these clunkers that were going back and forth on the Atlantic. We really have created battleships and aircraft carriers and icebreakers and all this good stuff. And so now we can get around quite a bit. And yes, we have been fudging all the footage from the South Pole. There really is a wall there, and that's why the research teams have been down there. But we have been unable to penetrate this wall because it is so massive and thick, and obviously it's holding the whole world together. So we're trying to get our ducks in a row so that when we do eventually report it, we have something to say. Because you might go into a panic if the smartest minds in the world can at least to do something about it, right? And again, there's was it Bird, right? And his people, we've got internet videos on YouTube where there's like this third generation hearsay interview with some pilot that said he flew planes through the wall, and it was an interdimensional wall. The planes disappeared, went on the other side. It's a lush jungle. There's more continents. There's more ocean out there. And then they came back and landed, right? Again, come on. There's some interviews about what people have seen when they flew to both the North Pole and the South Pole, reporting all kinds of crazy stuff. Now we've been to the North Pole a bunch of times, and nothing like that's up there. There's no lush jungles with dinosaurs running around, Sure as hell doesn't seem like the South Pole has any warmth to it whatsoever, at least on our side of the little fence there. But so you're at the wall. You're standing there. There has been such an exodus to the wall. And perhaps I would imagine there'd be about 3 different places they might penetrate the coast, get up there, and then, there's just so many people going to the wall, millions and millions of people that it's almost like a town that goes for 500 miles or whatever. They just clear a road, put buildings on both sides, cap it off on the top so you don't have to worry about the weather. And we literally have a little dig out right against the wall. Now what? Right? If the wall is a interdimensional object, then we walk across and we find what we find. If it's a solid state object, which again, people have been fighting for the hoax on the internet. There's the kid who superimposed a 3D mesh up against some photography of the sky, not realizing what he had done was create essentially a firmament wall in the middle of like the UK or something. I mean, he didn't really do his math that well. If you're in the UK, you're damn near in the center of the disk, and so you're not going to see any wall at all. You're not going to see any vanishing grid lines or something like that. So it's funny. The kid would have to be literally standing at the South Pole at one of the bases, then film the sky, then use his little infrared thing, and he would see this dome wall. But I mean, there's hoax after hoax after hoax because people are trying to play the game of stealing ad revenue online, right? But let's just say, I'm going to make this up, because this is me making it up right now is going to be the best scenario you have towards parsing these thoughts in your brain, which is the following. Let's say that there's some hidden journal in the world, some book, a tome that has a bunch of prophecy in it and a bunch of sort of how the world was built information, right? Which angels participated, the four corners of the earth and where you can find them. And it's like an Indiana Jones book, right? Where they say, here lies the stone of this, and you turn it 20 degrees and something else lights up and a door opens up, and it just keeps going and going and going. And so the reason why I put that there is so that you can believe the next assertion, which is someone says, the book says, that once you enter this realm, you're going to be in the celestial jackpot of heaven, or of the next dimension of existence with more celestial bodies. You in your mind think that Gabriel, and which he's kind of a fallen angel, but St. Pete's on the other side, or whatever religion you want to believe. Of course, this is suggesting that the world was created many, many millions of years ago, but Christianity is the one that actually has the drop on who's on the other side, which is laughable. But now you're looking at the door. Let's just say it's an old 50s diner swinging door. It's not even sealed. It's got two little fogged up windows. What are your hopes for when you go through that door? If you're Christian, then you have to worry about the hell and damnation algorithm, right? You're on this side, alive as a human being. And whether or not, you're in your 20s or you're in your 30s or whatever, you have X number of decades left, years left, provided you don't lose sight of what a bus is coming down the street. But if you go through that door, maybe Judgment Day for you happens automatically. Because in order to be in that other realm, you have to be pure, let's just say. You have to be pure truth. You have to transcend. Does your body collapse at the door and your soul goes through, and then your soul gets judged? Would you walk through the door if maybe in the next moment, as per your own indoctrination, you believe that you might spend eternity burning to death? I bet you'd think about it a little bit, wouldn't you? So without some dialogue between the other side and this side, prior to crossing some threshold, I'm not sure how many real sentient human beings would just rush across that barrier, go through that door, and even knock on the wall and trying to create attention. For those of you that believe that God suspends an ocean on the other side of the firmament wall, then it is your absolute hope and dream that God does not open that door and let it splash down on us and kill us. But let me ask you, if you found out that we were in a firmament dome of any kind, a flat disk, however you model the barrier and what's beyond it, is it going to be your lot in life to escape where we are right now? I'm willing to bet several of you would say, hell yes, I want out of this goddamn rat race. I went out from under the Rothschilds. I went out from under the Democrats and the Republicans. I went out from ignorant human beings that spew hatred all over the place in the name of peace. Anything's better than this world, you might believe, right? So let's do it. And that puts together, and that's really based on the precept that the rest of the universe is in utter bliss, that no one else has the need for choice. They're living in sort of this predetermined utopia because, again, the grass is always greener on the other side. Isn't that what we're insinuating here? Some folks think the world is about to end. Like I've said in a few episodes back, they think the Revelations is coming true. They believe in a devil, just like in the books. And, the more that people like Aleister Crowley and H.P. Lovecraft and those guys dream up new visions of the devil, it's interesting how in pop culture today those things become almost written in stone. Dante's Inferno is the model of hell. They're just fictional books that human beings wrote. And they become what people believe, which is sort of mind-blowing. The world has been upside down several times in most people's lives that are at least 40 years old. You know, we've had generations of youth that scared the hell out of adults. And we thought the whole world was going to hell. But we usually rebound. I had an epiphany the other day that was very interesting. I want to share with you guys, which is not exactly related to flat Earth, but it's part of a perceived ecosystem of how things might work. Let's rewind to the theory that there are different aged souls. Souls that have been perhaps human only so many times. Perhaps they were a dog or a cat before they became human, and they still kind of exhibit this previous state of being. You know, your cat people are very selfish and they're takers. They always take. Your dog people are constantly ass-kissing and giving and giving and giving. And then you've been human perhaps a few hundred times, a few thousand times, and you start to chill out and you start to behave like a human. This new form of being with its instrumentalities and its senses and its intellect and its engagement with the universe, its Gnostic engagement to all things that are true. And so you would have a group of souls that were young as relates to this form of being. They could be absolute geniuses in being some weird energy being or some color in the universe, right? But they don't know how to be human yet. And so I think that the overall assumption is that we have sort of a mixture of the wise old souls with the new souls. And that's how my mind's always perceived it once I first could contemplate that I was looking at an old soul. It's most profound when you have a child that is very mature. That's where you really get hit by old soul thinking, right? I met an 81-year-old woman when I went back to my hometown recently here. And her soul is so old and so wise and so cool that it's scary to think how many times she's been here, in my opinion. Apparently she was married to a man who probably had the same exact attribute there. But I was thinking about this, and it was one of these things where I wasn't really trying to think about it, but the universe kept just pushing this thought process into my brain. And it gave me this epiphany, okay? Doesn't have to be true, but it was a very fascinating idea that for those of you who study epoch transitions and sort of the attrition of an epoch, where we don't really know how long an epoch really is, but let's just say 2,500 years to 2,700 years. We're in the age of a Pisces right now. I think we're going into Aquarius, right? The idea is that we have these moments of really tough living, and then we go into a more blissful form of living. And then we go back into a tough living. And it's just this way to keep sure, to make sure that we are staying in shape, that we are seeing the benefits of utopia, but then we are also being kind of ground into the ground with depressions and recessions and all this kind of stuff, right? Ignorant people running the world, and then brilliant people running the world. Ignorant people creating society and culture, and then brilliant people creating society and culture. And I just got to thinking, think about when humanity was really last in its heyday years, And you look at art. I think that's a great way to look at it. From probably Charlie Chapman's era all the way up till maybe the end of the 80s, you had what appeared to be more adults running this world than children. And in the 90s, we had this huge switch. And you could probably elect the 80s as a transitional phase of going into it. But now the world in the 21st century appears as though most people that are in charge are bumbling idiots, babies, social justice warriors. They don't understand the first thing about history, so they're repeating as quickly as possible the most regrettable phases of our history, right? But now old soul doesn't mean you have a good soul. It just means you have an old soul. So manipulation always exists at all levels because there's always someone there. But what I'm seeing right now in the Gen Z group are kids, again, putting down their social media, not getting into video games. They're dancing, they're playing guitars and playing music, and they're getting back into what really makes an individual happy. And they're doing it with class, and they're super freaking dedicated. And it would appear as if the souls that are rotating in today are starting to get older again, because we've had 3 decades roughly of these immature souls. You know, it's 2017 today, so by 2020, a lot of these kids will start hitting 18 that are doing all these amazing things today, and they'll start infiltrating, you know, governments and corporations and the way it works. And of course, there'll always be sort of devilish vampires that are trying to get them to sway their way into the darkest realm of operation, right? You know, all the law students in Harvard University are solicited by the banking cartels the second they enroll. They spend their summers being flown all over the world, wined and dined by these bankers, such that by the time they get done, they go work for them, and they can't go back to the previous form of living, so they must take the salaries and take the jobs in order to keep up with the lush life they've lived for 3 to 7 years, depending on when they were picked up as a prodigy, right? What does it have to do with flat Earth? Well, isn't it interesting that if you were to adopt that previous concept to any level, that the older souls are starting to move in, that because we are a hive mind of reality projection, whether it be made by, you know, holograms or ethereal winds or both, doesn't really matter. We are being infected by the heavier lifting, wiser souls. And so perhaps with their return comes more sanity. And because this time, during their return, we have the internet to help hive mind at light speed, right? How could you hive mind in the 1950s? Any concept would have to be picked up by mass media. It'd have to be put into a movie that goes international, because there were really no other forms of group think back in those days besides maybe a Elks Club or Boy Scouts, right? As the world gets crazier and crazier, we tend to have these moments where we potentially entertain the idea that in our lifetime it will never be good, that our progress will be too slow to really affect the world that we live in. It'll always be painful, always involve suffering. And so that starts to really open up the notion that let's look for hope. Let's look for some promise that's going to fix things. And I think that with, you know, the few people that still hang on to the gray alien idea, they're a hope, right? Come down, land on our front yard, offer us the cure to cancer. You know, what is it? The day the Earth stood still. That was the very first scene. Guy had this little widget in his hand, and they shot it with the 45, and it blew up. And of course, he doesn't have any mechanism to replicate that thing, which I think is hilarious. But flat Earth is a bit of this thing, right? It is this notion that if we can just get to the wall, we don't even care if anyone believes this, right? How many of you who believe in flat Earth would give a shit if I could say to you, look, I've got a boat that'll get you to the edge, and I've got a crane on that boat that even if you go up to a 5-story ice barrier, this boat has the technique and a helicopter that will lift all the supplies you need up to the edge of the ice, and you hop in that little skipper, a little snowmobile like the one in The Shining, and you just haul ass to the border. And I've even mapped it out for you, the best place to go. There's no crevasses or mountains that are going to get in the way. It's a straight shot to the center, which would be for you the edge. Would you care if the rest of the world cared? No. You're in to save your own bacon, man. And maybe if you're married and you got some kids, you'd take them with you, but it'd be Richard Dreyfuss and Close Encounters of the Third Kind again. He had a wife and 2 kids, and he hopped on that ship and left at the end. Because he kind of thought, well, my wife's an idiot, and my kids seem to be more like her than me. None of them supported me in this notion of trying to find the truth. I finally found the truth behind Devil's Tower. And, good luck, folks. See you later. I'm going to go get enlightened. But what I don't understand about us as human beings is this incredible notion that there are that there's always greener grass on the other side. It's usually something that comes about and is something that is believed, and it's where cultural beliefs and I would say maybe even superstitions and other things start happening, where as society screws up society and allows these nutbags to run the world, and they do a horrible job serving themselves and not man, the superstitions and religions that promise otherwise start to accelerate in membership. You know, I did an episode on reincarnation. And if you really wrap your mind behind reincarnation, there is a bit of a promise in that process that it doesn't matter if we die here, no matter how old we are, because we just simply recycle. And who knows how that would work, if that works, whether or not you get a little reprieve on the other side, or if, you know, if you're a baby and you come in here and something happens to you, maybe just go right back out and go right back in, because there's no point in celebrating a family that you never really knew. But what is the promise? What do you tell yourself at night when you think about the fact that you believe it's flat? Because there's something that someone is hanging on to hardcore. Because when you have someone show up in a chat and they call you names because you don't believe it's flat, I assure you, I promise you, that there is a force, an intellectual force, that is promising that individual a blissful thing on the other side. And their, I think, anger is that if you would just get on board with flat Earth, we would all finally do the research, finally figure out what's there at the wall, and we could all live in bliss. And so, God damn it, you, for not believing in flat Earth. You're stunting all of our growth. You're stunting us from escaping the rule of man. So get on board already. My thought is, if you think it's that important, if you think it's that certain that it's a positive thing, then someone's got to start talking to someone and raising money. First, you got to conduct that experiment. Put a gyroscope in your lap, fly from New York to Mexico City, look at it. If it didn't turn, then you're on. You're on. Get a boat, get to the edge, get a fucking militia together, get a bunch of retired, Navy SEALs, show them the experiment, prove to a bunch of guys who can kick some ass and take some names that it is flat, publish it around the world to get more consensus and more support, do a GoFundMe, do whatever you got to do, show it to one of these, Mark Cubans, show them the proof. Say, look, brother, we need $250,000 million to get our asses out there to see this thing. We've got to reveal the truth. There's a similarity between believing in flat Earth and believing in Jesus Christ. For those of us that think Jesus was nothing more than a story, I think that for myself, I've admitted this several times on this show. And when I had the Mormons coming to my house every once in a while and talking to me about it, and when I've talked to my friends about it, it's one of these things of, if you die and you don't believe that Christ was real at all, but you get on the other side and there's this dude there, and it's Jesus Christ. One, I think that you would be given definitely the opportunity to flip your decision, and go, oh, really? You're real? Holy crap. Well, then were you all the other Jesuses that came in other cultures? Oh, you were? Okay, so you keep coming back and showing yourself as different, it's a different mother-father scenario, virgin birth, and you are the prodigal son that was Tamos, and you're, the son of Horus and Isis, and so on and so forth. I just think you'd be allowed to say, well, what's funny is every time you came back and it got written in history, I kind of thought that looked like a story that man was writing. And I really do believe the Vatican messed with the Bible quite a bit, I think that there'd be some forgiveness and you could move on with whatever the afterlife is built out of, right? If that were true. I think the same is true for the flat earth theory. You got a lot of people that in the back of their brain, they're kind of like, God, One, a lot of people can't conceive of any shape of the planet because they don't get that deep. They don't research anything and it's not interesting to them. Doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're probably living a pretty good life wherever they are. There's no need to ask questions about it. Other folks have obviously a huge vested history in studying pop science. They're an authority in pop science, and the last thing they want you to do is prove that they're not smart. And so they attack you back simply to protect what's in their heart, what's in their chest, you know. But the second you can prove it, is the second that the world starts to convert at a level that's exponential. Because I guarantee if you could videotape the gyroscope in your lap and do that little experiment, then a bunch of people would reconduct the experiment. Of course, all the Neil deGrasse Tysons would sit there and fuck with it, so it would rotate. That guy can't lose his Uber geek card in Hollywood, you know, role. But you're going to have people, let's say you prove it, you're going to have people that say, don't go messing with it. If it is here, and we are in a dome, so we'll rewrite the history books a little bit to get you at the forefront of what is real, right? We're going to give you credit that you have figured out what the shape of the world is. And of course, don't forget there's going to be a lot more theories. If you prove it, they're going to say, oh, Earth is 10 times as big, and so it's rotating and there's something out there. But some people might say, look, what if there's dinosaurs on the other side? We don't really want them coming in here eating us up. What if there's a race out there that thinks they own us, and the second we get rowdy and go to the edge, they will flood the inside of this thing, and we would be down to a speck of human existence, and then they'll simply reset our brains to not know about it, and we go back to zero. So you going to the edge of the dome could be terrifying for folks, even if they did believe it was there. So for them, it's a promise of utter destruction. And what's fascinating is we have this story of the Tower of Babel, right? The Tower of Babel, if you're not familiar with it, is, you can look it up in Google, click images if you just want to get a really quick thumbnail of what it is. But a king built a tower, huge tower, thick. It just kept going up and up and up. And his whole thing was he was going to reach heaven with a tower. And I believe the way the story ended was that someone shot an arrow at the top out of fury of not being able to keep the tower going up or something, and then man was punished for trying to reach God with 12 tribes, 12 different languages that we have all over the world now. And if you're religious and you believe that story, then why wouldn't you believe that would apply to going to the edge of the world and knocking on the door and trying to escape? Wouldn't you think your wrathful, immature, childish God would have all kinds of surprises for you if you messed with his little experiment called humanity and Earth? I mention these things because I don't think we have the slightest consensus on what it means to say it's flat, to prove it's flat. Why is it flat? Who made it? Is it directly God? Is it a group of aliens? What is it? I'll put it this way. I rarely see videos on YouTube that go into that. And obviously, no one knows. I mean, you have these it's really interesting. You know, we do believe that there are disinformation videos out there, and every subject that you're not supposed to learn is created by our tax dollars. And then you have people that exploit all day long for ad revenue. They exploit. They create clickbait constantly. You know, everything that's up there. What was it? I watched a Japanese animation that just came out. Someone posted it to YouTube. Was it Bandai didn't tell YouTube that it's copyrighted material, so you can watch the whole thing in HD, and you know eventually it'll get knocked down. But someone's selling ad space before it, and they're making a killing. They'll get 50,000 views before it gets taken down. And all they do is repost it in a different account. They do weird filters on it to distort it a little bit so that it doesn't recognize the video as copyrighted, right? They'll echo the audio or something, right? But those folks, if you are a flat earther, they're sort of your enemy of ever achieving a consensus such that you're taken seriously, because they're polluting it with Bigfoot and a bunch of other crazy theories that relate supposedly to flat earth. I mean, they can take anything and apply it to flat earth. It's sort of like the lunacy around climate change, that, you know, these fucking fossils who are complete racist. You talk about white privilege. The only place white privilege truly exists in its most pure form is the political structure of the world, especially in America. You know, Nancy Pelosi is absolutely concentrated white privilege. Almost every politician in California is full of white privilege. Jerry Brown and what's your fuck? Feinstein. But they say that, you know, ISIS attacks people because of climate change. I mean, it's just insane. Maxine Waters, an absolute, disgrace to her movement. So if we, and this is my opinion, I mean, if you really want a second revolution, a 2.0 reprisal of flat Earth resurging on the internet, then there needs to be a consensus group. And I know there's the Flat Earth Society and that sort of thing, but there needs to be a lot more sentient sort of existential thought about what it is that people think is going on, what's going to happen as a result of this being true. And I'll give you an example of a fictional agency that did exactly this. If you remember Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you have a tonal message that was sent to mankind, which is the song bum 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 bum. And when they parsed it, it was a geographical GPS location to Devil's Tower. And the government had the wisest, most brilliant people on the job. And for the layman, they were shocked with the Gestalt vision of Devil's Tower, this thing, which is what Richard Dreyfuss was completely enamored with. And when he found the mother of the son that was captured, she had tons of like charcoal pictures and stuff in her house, and so they ended up combining their efforts and traveling out to Devil's Tower. And I guess they bumped into a doctor or something who didn't make it. He was tranquilized with some spray. But they're the ones that escaped, got around the other side, and what was interesting was that the government had, obviously the backstory was that the government knew about these UFOs and had been developing protocols of engagement, so that when you see the laboratory that they created on the desert floor of, Idaho or something, they were totally ready. It was Wyoming or something. Sorry, I can't remember. But they had a gigantic, color symbol octave map of a keyboard that was right there on the ground, and they played that instrument routine to the UFO, and then they played it back, and then they played new tunes, and we played new tunes. And they had this genius on the keyboard that understood the shifts of keys and octaves, down a fifth, up a seventh, over, half note, all this other stuff. And so they ended up creating a language between the two of them, but in a brilliant move. And this is 1978, people. You're talking about a time when there were only Apple IIs in people's homes. There was no IBM PC. There was a few copycats coming, but they weren't released yet. And they hit a button in the middle of this interaction with these aliens where the computer took over and started playing it back, basically listening and calculating and playing back notes to the alien spacecraft. Eventually, creating a friendly interaction that was endorsed by the aliens, to which they opened the door at the bottom, and you had the mother alien step out first, and she's this real tall, sort of, what we would call today the beige female version of the Greys. The head's different, but they're still almond eyes and all that kind of stuff. And then all the kids came out, the boys, it would seem. And that's when, our people started coming out first. And then it shut, and then it opened, and that kind of thing. So, but eventually we met all of them, and that's when all of the red jumpsuit humans, which Dreyfuss essentially got himself involved in. I can't remember exactly how he convinced them to take him with him, but to allow the military to indoctrinate him into this whole program, because he had no training. But he was allowed to go where everyone else had training, and they were talking about the training in the film, I believe, in a debriefing, or a briefing, excuse me. And they were organized. They don't know what's on the other side. They haven't been to this foreign creature's spaceship. They don't know what's inside. And of course, the extended version gave us a glimpse of what was inside the vehicle. A lot of us believe it was much better to leave it a mystery. But whatever. We don't have that for Flat Earth, as far as I know. There's so many mixed theories about what's on the other side of a firmament dome that how could you have one strategy? You're going to have plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And all those little letters are, okay, there's a wall with a big snowdrift against it, and you're not going to be able to penetrate it. So the only thing you can do is knock on the wall and say, please open up. Let's talk. We know you're here. We know where we are. We're not where we thought we were. If it's interdimensional, well, do you do the poltergeist thing? You tie a 5-mile cable around a human being, and you let them walk on the other side, and the second you feel a weird tug, we pull them back in. Do we just fly a jet straight into that remote-controlled drone? Hope to God that the transmission of video and audio can get back through the dome on the other side. You know, we haven't thought these things through, in my opinion, or at least anything that I've heard from a group of people trying to create a consensus. For me, that's intriguing. For a person like me, I'm not used to going halfway on anything and quitting. It's very disturbing to me to do that because there's so much wisdom, even in failure. There's wisdom in trying something and failing. And when I see the Flat Earth movement really just sort of, they get done with what I call, when I teach class and I teach project management, I always say that there's the first 40, I call it the fun 40. And that is really where talk is cheap. There's no action required by human beings, and we know people have gone past this barrier for sure, right? You know, the next is a 50% phase where you really learn who's serious about things. The next 50% is pretty damn tough, and it'll shake out the men versus the boys, I guess the women versus the girls, and we find out a lot more about ourselves and about the project and the viability of everything, whether or not all of our planning and research and business models and all that stuff is actually going to work out. And then the last 10% I split into two pieces, a 9% piece and a 1% piece. I call it the brutal 9. The brutal 9 is where even though you've built a pretty damn good group with your last 90%, you've definitely seen people peel away. You've probably added a few resources in that first 90%. The 9 is going to really test you. And you're going to get short with each other and that sort of thing, right? You need to brace yourself and talk to the team and say, look, we're going to push the envelope beyond normal, and we're going to probably say things and do things and feel things that we're not going to feel once this is over. So let's not take anything personal, people. One of you calls each other a name, realize that as soon as the project is over, you're going to soften up and say you're sorry. And the last percent is what I call the last man standing. And that is really likened to climbing Mount Everest. There's only going to be a few of you standing after that. It's just going to be really a test of your physical attrition, your mental ability to go without sleep and continue to push perfection out the door, to make it good enough. That's what needs to happen in the Flat Earth episode, right? By the way, I went home to my hometown. I give a shout out to a little business that I found. This has nothing to do with Flat Earth at all. But just kind of reinvigorated my faith in the Midwest. Not that I lost it, but it just helped out a little bit. Because the way it works for me is that my family members and friends will go back to exactly where I grew up in this little town of Chanute, Kansas, named after the pilot Octave Chanute. And they'll come back and they'll compare my hometown to California or to wherever they live, and they'll sometimes just go, oh gosh, the town's just looking horrible, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really? Okay, so then I go back and I see it, and I see all of the great things that are going on. There's businesses that are still condemned and that kind of stuff, or there's no one in there for lease signs and that kind of stuff. But overall, when you're willing to look at what's positive, there's a lot of great things going on in the Midwest. It's really cool. But I'm driving by an old building that used to have an electronics store that my father used to shop at a lot when I was a kid. I literally spent a good 5 or 6 years going in and out of this building, and it hasn't had a business in it for a really long time. But I'm driving by, and it looks very similar to the way it did, a little bit better. And I look in the window as I'm driving by 30 miles an hour, because that's the speed limit. And the guy was smart. He put 4 copies of the logo in the window so that when you drove by, the first one catches your eye, and then you keep looking over. And I saw virtual reality arcade on this window. And I was like, what? I'm in the middle of southeast Kansas in a little tiny town with probably 8,000 people in it. VR arcade, really? So I flip around, I park, I go inside, and I am in shock. He has built, this guy, his name's Jeffrey, he built 3 rooms that were absolutely beautifully done. And not only did he build a VR arcade, he built them out of the best headsets in the world, which are the HTC Vive headsets. He does have an Oculus rig in a car seat, which is pretty cool. But the way he rigged the rooms, the way that he decorated the whole place, it was like you were walking into a place in LA. And he was helping a customer at the time, so I got a chance to move around and take some photographs before he and I got the chance to talk. But I climbed Mount Everest on the second time I went there, which was really cool. I'm in my hometown with this HTC Vive headset on. I got a giant space to work with, which he also got the headsets perfectly calibrated to the room, which is a very tough endeavor. I've taught VR, and even at colleges, we've had a hell of a time keeping those things calibrated. So that was really cool, and it was by the way, it was very exhausting to do this climb. But I mentioned that just because I mentioned Everest, but if you're ever buzzing through the area, right now it's called Reality Room. It's got 2 R's facing the other way as a logo. But climbing Everest is kind of what you're trying to do and get to the flat Earth. You're going to have to do that last haul. When I was Electronic Arts, we went in 1999, and as sort of this inspirational thing that they did before we started this big build of EA.com, we had to watch a movie of Everest. And I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I knew Everest, people climb it, but I didn't know the different base camps and the fact that the last camp is the hardest one, obviously, to get up to the ridge. And it was, what ended up being about a lot of people who died up there. And so the CEO of EA.com, John Riccatello, came up at the time and said, I thought this was going to be more inspirational, but, the main message is we got to climb a mountain here. And it's going to be tough, and no one's ever done it before like we're about to do it. And he was right, 100%. And that's what Flat Earth has to do. Get organized, create base camps of thought. And just like the base camps on Everest, the base of the mountain is it's warm, and you can look up at the peak, and you're about to go off into an endeavor where you actually have probably a 20% chance of dying up there. And that's if weather's good. Weather's bad, you probably have a damn near a 50% chance of dying up there. There's fucking dead bodies all up there, frozen to death, right? And from what I understand, the waste up there is horrible. People bringing oxygen tanks and all their supplies and just leaving it up there, dirting up the island or the mountain up there. But each base camp that you ascend, just think about how you get enlightened at every base camp. You learn more about what you're getting into every base camp that you stop climbing Everest. And if you ever were to make it to the tippy top, then you sort of have all knowledge about climbing Everest. And what I see with Flat Earth is they're stuck at maybe like base camp 3. Pretty high, but no one's willing to take the summit. No one's willing to try to take the summit. There are some financial obstacles to it, but again, my little thing I keep repeating, and I'm going to keep repeating it, which is gyroscope in your lap. Fly halfway around the world and see if it turns. That's all you got to do. I mean, Eric Dubé, you live in the Asian Pacific Rim. All right, get one of these things. Fly down to the bottom tip of Indonesia. Fly to Hawaii and just fly back. See what happens, man. You'd be the first guy to crack the nut, right? One of the other main reasons I'm going to leave you guys with for creating this episode is that any movement we get a hold of that has the magnitude of Flat Earth ends up dividing us quite a bit, right? How many people do you not know that you might have called a name because they ridiculed your belief system in one way or the other, round, flat, whatever? Well, that means if somebody doesn't like you somewhere based on a theory that they can't prove. Kind of sucks, right? We know right now in the world it needs to be unified. You know, this whole thing about Black Lives Matter, I mean, and movements like it. Like Morgan Freeman said, you know, look, stop talking about it and just integrate already. This is a black man that fought to get his career going. He knows what he's talking about. So let's stop fighting. And those who believe one way, go do your proof. Those of you who believe it's round, your biggest challenge is using NASA as a basis for reality, right? The other day, someone posted a 360 video of the ISS. And so it was a spacewalk that you could rotate the camera, and still no shot of the sun, no shot of the moon. Not even an attempt. And those cameras will not burn out if you point at the sun. Very few cameras still have any problems with that overexposure. What I figured out was that they built the ISS prop in a way that the only way that you can get out and do anything in an average spacewalk is towards Earth, a little opening door. In fact, their little spiral like Millennium Falcon window that looks out is pointed at Earth, so you can't, there's no excuse. Well, sorry, they've got an excuse why they don't have to film any celestial body out there. Crazy. They should be able to film sunrise after sunrise as they circle the Earth within a day, you know? But they don't. Maybe it's real, but they're doing a shit job proving it. Anyway, I hope you feel me. I hope you can get behind this. I'm just one guy, man. You guys have to take this stuff and run with it. We need new evidence, but we need organization more than anything. And emotions cannot be involved with the organization. An organization has to be pretty much non-biased, factual, and we'll go from there. Build a protocol for what you think would be the procedure based on various types of firmament walls that you might find. But if someone takes that gyroscope, puts it in their lab, flies halfway around the world, and it's nearly 90 at basically a 90-degree turn, then you're going to have to give it up. And you got to be big enough to give it up. What we don't have to do is validate space agencies that lie simply because we proved it's round. They're not redoing the globes in the Earth to the Peter projection map of all the continents. But everything we get from space matches the previous model, which is wrong. So we're looking at massive conspiracies right in front of our face, right? Unless there's some information about that whole process that hasn't been revealed yet, right? I've never seen a Peter projection debunk video of why the globes haven't changed. I just know that in the 1950s, there was a group that tried to tell the world, we have to change the globes, they're wrong. I mean, they're similar shapes, but they're more elongated. All of the continents are more elongated vertically than they are horizontally. All right. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. There's video if you're on audio. There's audio if you're on video. There's a locked Facebook group. For those of you on video, I forgot to mention the last several videos, but there's YouTube.com, which you guys are familiar with, and then there's vid.me, vid.me. VidMe's a little bit behind YouTube. I need to share that up. I'll do that in the next couple days here. Audio, it's on iTunes, it's on Google Play, or you can just go to the website on your phone, click the RSS feed, and you will be given the feed on your phone. It'll lock in beautifully. But there's direct links to iTunes, direct links to Google Play, so whatever player you like, it's cool. But anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.